And welcome inside our studios in Atlanta, another edition of Game Time. Casey Stern with you. 3 days away from the madness. We call it free agent fever. Seems like lately every year we're seeing big names change teams. Remember back in 2014, LeBron went home. Since then, 3 championship opportunities, 1 title. Meanwhile, for the Spurs, they went to Portland and picked up LaMarcus Aldridge in 2015. Pop and company lost Kawhi in this playoffs. We'll see if they make another run next year. Meanwhile, we run to where the big story was at the beginning of the season and where it ended with the MVP of the finals in Kevin Durant. Made the big move to join the Warriors, and the rest is history. So what do we have in store for 2017, you might ask? And with that, we bring in Bobby Marks, former NBA assistant GM, front office insider for The Vertical. Bobby, appreciate the knowledge. So let's start with this. There are, I'm sure, a lot of challenges heading into every free agency. What stands out to you as the biggest challenge of all as kind of you get ready now for the first?
Well, Casey, I think first you're at the mercy of the agent right now. Like the draft process is that you are waiting for the call. If you are the Clippers with Doc Rivers, you're waiting for a call from Leon Rose, Chris Paul's agent, to get a commitment there. This is the process where you better make sure you have your contingencies in order. The one thing I would say is that for these teams that when they go into these meetings in the next few days, you better sell your basketball product. Don't worry about the marketing and the bells and whistles, but worry about the product on the court.
You know, one of the things we saw last year is early bird specials and not so special turnouts. Mozgov, think about Luol Deng. We saw some big contracts and they didn't end up well. Take us through that. In this kind of a marketplace, how important is that decision-making process of, I want to jump before somebody else, but maybe we saw a couple of guys go too soon?
Well, it's important. I think what you saw last year is that a lot of teams committed to a lot of big contracts right off the bat. We saw Timothy Mozgov, Luol Deng, Jan Mahinmi, big numbers that teams are certainly regretting right now. Just last week, that Mozgov contract was traded to Brooklyn, and you had to attach D'Angelo Russell. And what I always say is it's certainly a follow the leader type league, and what teams can show restraint are the ones that are going to have some flexibility in the long run.
You know, I like to keep the calculator, the TI-82, at home. So I ask people who understand the cap to help me out with it. We saw, obviously, the change got a bit lower. What's going to be the biggest impact of that change in the dollar figure?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think you could look at teams that are going to be in a luxury tax. We can look at Cleveland just off the bat for the luxury tax that's going from 121 to projected 119. They're in the hole already, $10 million in a loss for that number going down. If you look up at the Celtics, if they were at a $101 million cap that we had thought was projected, maybe a player like Terry Rozier or possibly Marcus Smart wouldn't be traded to clear some cap space for a Blake Griffin or a Gordon Hayward. So although it's a small amount, only $2 million, it's certainly going to have a big impact when we get going in free agency.
You know, a lot of fans at home are sitting and watching what's been a point guard draft, and they're thinking, will my point guard come back? Because we've got situations with Lowry and Teague and Drew Holiday and others, and there's that kind of dichotomy between are they worth the money, Bobby, or do we have to? How do you not, as a GM, feel forced to make a move, for example, if you're Toronto? Because what does life look like if you don't pay, Kyle?
Well, you're right. I think what you look at is, as an example, is last year's Mike Conley in Memphis. You know, teams that are boxed into a corner where you don't have the flexibility, if you let that player go out and sign a replacement. Look at New Orleans right now. Drew Holiday, unrestricted free agent, and a strength of this free agent class is the point guards. If the Pelicans let Holiday go, they're stuck with about $13 million in cap space to replace him. They traded Tim Frazier, the backup, last week. So I think in Holiday's case, you're going to probably see an overpay. Lowry is a little bit different. I think his max number is certainly $34 million. I think that number could be about $10 million below that. But it's all about leverage from an agent standpoint and also, you know, from a team perspective.
You know, when you look at kind of some of the guys who improved last year, we don't talk a lot about Otto Porter, but we're going to now, especially with dollar figures. And it's interesting because while we hear about maybe trying to convince Paul George or some other big member to join the Wizards with Beal and Wall, it's a different team if you don't bring back Porter. So how do you as a GM handle that kind of a scenario with a guy in this case like an Otto Porter?
Well, I think you have to be aggressive with Porter. Remember, he's represented by David Falk, and David Falk a couple years ago had Greg Monroe sign that qualifying offer, and that did not turn well for the Pistons. And I think if you kind of get in a cat and mouse game with Falk and you put a hard line down there, that don't be surprised if he takes that same approach there. And another team, Washington, that paid a lot of money. You look at the contracts last summer: Jan Mahimi, Jason Smith, Andrew Nicholson was eventually traded. A team that's boxed in a corner. They've got $90 million plus in guaranteed contracts and 2 restricted free agents. Besides Otto Porter, they got Bojan Bogdanovic. So little wiggle room for Washington in regards to the Porter negotiations. I would expect his number to come right at the max.
Now, draft night, we had a lot of big picks, and fans were watching all of that, but it was really Embiid, Joel, naming the feds that I thought stood out from the social media side of things. So he can't make the nickname up, Bobby, and then leave, but you have a chance because of this weird loophole to get him to an extension. How do you handle that with the injury history of Embiid?
Well, it's amazing that, a player who's played 31 games is now entering his 4th year in his rookie extension. If I'm Philadelphia, I'm taking a cautious approach here. I think I need to see more of a working body. We know what he can do on the court when he's healthy, but from a health perspective, I would hate to commit top dollar to a player that might break down during the season. Can you do an extension and possibly put some protection in there? There's an Exhibit 3 where you can protect maybe that foot and in case of an injury, possibly. But that takes for Embiid and his agent, Leon Rose, to commit to that. So I think you're going to see a cautious approach with Philadelphia.
All right, now LeBron said he didn't create super teams, but I know he'd like one. He certainly needs one, whether this is his final year, Bobby, or not. So you try and figure out, how do they do that? A, is there a way to do it without moving Kevin Love? And if you're going to move Kevin Love, who are you freeing up that money to go get?
Well, Casey, I think you might see March 1st come early this year. And when I say March 1st is that's the date when players are bought out of their contracts. We saw last year with Darren Williams, Andrew Bogut, players like that, veterans. Now, can Christmas come early for Cleveland? Can you get a Carmelo Anthony bought out of his contract, Dwayne Wade in Chicago? Are those players going to risk some financial sacrifices? Remember, they only have the 5.2 tax mid-level and their minimum. So if both players are bought out, who's going to get that money there? Do you split it? But I think that's the best route that this team is going to go from an improvement standpoint. We've seen the Kevin Love traction over the last week or two, that as good as Kevin Love is, power forwards and centers in this day and age, in this market, just doesn't have appeal as a wing might be.
It's interesting because obviously we know the David Griffin situation. There seem to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen, if you will, right now, Bobby, in terms of Cleveland. But they know the writing could be on the wall after the year with LeBron. Does that, as a GM, make you, if you're sitting there in that conference room, want to push that pedal maybe further than you normally would, because this could be the last chance?
Well, it's twofold. I think you look at it that you have to treat LeBron James as a player who's entering the last year of his contract with a future that's uncertain here. On the other end, are you willing to risk a Kevin Love who's got multiple years left on his contract, maybe even a Tristan Thompson, for maybe a player like Paul George who's got 1 year left? And if you do that and LeBron leaves next summer, you're basically stuck with the team that you had before LeBron got there in 2014, minus Andrew Wiggins, who was traded, and Kyrie Irving would basically be on an island by himself. So it's a risky proposition, but you've got to be in aggressive mode right now. You can't be whoever the new general manager is, if it's Chauncey Billups or if it's Kobe Altman who's in charge right now, the person that drove LeBron James out of Cleveland once again.
All right, Bobby, appreciate it. Stay by the magic of technology. Keep all of your digital possibilities handy. We'll get you between now and the fever. Thanks again, man.
Thanks, Casey.
All right.